This video was produced by the Utah Commission on Aging in partnership with Utah Legal Services and Adult Protective Services under a grant awarded by the Office for Victims of Crime, Office of Justice Programs at the U.S. Department of Justice. My name is Rob Entz, Executive Director for the Utah Commission on Aging. The Governor's Commission was created to inform and empower Utahns as they navigate the opportunities and challenges of aging. Financial exploitation is the fastest growing allegation in Utah. Adult Protective Services investigates about 3,000 financial cases per year. Nationally, the Federal Trade Commission fields almost 3 million reported fraud complaints annually, and most crimes go unreported. The creative mind of a criminal is unlimited. What is sobering, however, is that most of these acts are committed by people we know. Family members account for 60% of this criminal activity, and you add to that friends, church, and club members, people you know. This is called affinity fraud. Experienced broadcast journalist Janice Evans takes us through the story of Alan and Brett Ormsby and their grandfather, Bob.
Robert James Miller was a very successful independent businessman. He doted on his 2 daughters and 9 grandchildren. He was also an active and respected and generous member of his community.
My grandfather was a great mentor for me, a good role model. He'd come to my swim meets or football games or whatever it was. He would take the time to show up and be there for us. I always appreciated that and admired his commitment to the family.
I was just thinking the best compliment my grandpa could give you was to call you a doer. He wanted people to be out there and doing and accomplishing, and that was one of the things I remember really well about him was how much praise he would give you for your grades and for working hard and having a good work ethic. It's something that he really instilled in all of us. He was very smart. You could ask him a question about anything and he would know a little something about everything.
He was a successful businessman his whole life, different projects, different ideas.
He started out with establishing companies, chemical companies, and then he would build that company up, and then a bigger company would come in and buy that out from under him, and then he would usually take a position with that company.
I know as he got older, he also bought stocks. He invested in property, and he was very good with people. He was part of the Lions Club and generous. I remember as kids taking us to the Lions Club breakfast.
He lived in a very frugal way. I mean, the home that he owned in Holiday is a lovely Rambler, but probably 2,000 square feet. And, didn't have a whole lot of external things to show that he was a wealthy man.
Bob Miller's success in business enabled him to become a private lender. He met this man, Paul Jacobson, at the local Lions Club and began lending money for Paul's real estate project in Texas. These investments were based on friendship and local church relationships.
Christmas of 2000, saw my grandfather at Christmas, seemed upset and a little worried. And so then I went and saw him in between Christmas and New Year's, and he was very upset. I never heard him curse. He wasn't an angry man. He didn't drink. I'm like, wow, something is really wrong for him to be that upset. And he was worried that Paul Jacobson was lying to him about the progress of the project that he had loaned him money on. So I offered to fly down to Texas to look at it. He didn't want to inconvenience me. Paul had repeatedly told my grandfather, we're almost done, we're right there, I just need a little more money, I need a little more this. And so I figured I could go fill in the gap for him. I went and told my grandfather, I'm going to Texas anyway. I'm going to use these frequent flyer miles. I'll just swing by and take a look at the project. I'll take a camcorder, I'll video it for you so you can get an update. I was a general contractor, I still am. I have a construction company. Never met Paul before that. He was very charming. He offered to meet me, show me around the project. So as I flew down and started, I went to the project. It was in bad shape. There were units that were completely gutted, bare studs, nothing done. Some were partially finished. So it wasn't anywhere near where Paul had told him it was at. And I think once he saw the video, it confirmed to him that his suspicions that things were wrong and Paul was lying to him. I mean, he challenged Paul repeatedly to say, why isn't this done? You don't need more money. Why don't you get this? You know, so my grandfather knew at that point that something was wrong. But then for the rest of us to get involved and figure it out, yeah, it took a year and a half. Paul saw a chance to victimize and steal from my grandfather. And the worst part is they had this relationship of trust. And I think my grandfather saw them as friends. This complex had 52 units, and Paul was buying units for $30,000 to $45,000. And so what he would do is he would go borrow money to buy these units. Every unit that he bought before my grandfather had the fall, my grandfather had a deed of trust with every loan. So once my grandfather had the fall, within 6 months, 8 years, they would bring in and he would sign a napkin, 2 sentences saying, you know, I'm borrowing $1.4 million for 36 months at X amount of interest, and sign Paul Jacobson. You know, they'd spend hours at Wentworth convincing him to sign these papers and documents. They came and they needed money, and my grandfather was in his wheelchair, and he couldn't sign the documents because of the Parkinson's and this fact. So he banked at First Security, and First Security knew him personally. He'd banked there for years. So that the Jacobsons could get the money out of his account, they had to physically go get him out of the wheelchair, drive him to the bank, and take him to the bank so that they could see him sign the document. It was like $867,000 they took that day. I don't know an example of somebody that Paul defrauded who was under 65. If you're dealing with somebody, make sure you involve your family, right? And share what you're doing with people.
I remember when we won the judgment down in Texas. And by that point, he was quite sick. But there was a look and a sense of satisfaction in his eyes, and the few words that he could get out, you knew he was very, very happy that he won this judgment against Paul Jacobson. But I would say it's incredibly expensive and difficult to get these things successfully prosecuted.
Tracy Larson is Vice President at People's Intermountain Bank. She helped create a pilot program underwritten by AARP to train bank tellers how to identify and manage fraud during a banking transaction. Tracy, nice to see you this afternoon.
Thanks. Good to be here.
You told me one time that banks lose about $1 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how that breaks down.
What happens is when a senior becomes exploited, financially exploited, there's a lot of different avenues where they lose money. It isn't just out of their pocketbook. It can turn into a Medicare or Medicaid problem, and banks are involved in that as well.
So a fraudulent transaction cascades in multiple places.
It does.
Tell us a little bit about the training for tellers and what they're supposed to look out for when someone wants to withdraw money in an unusual circumstance.
When a bank is committed to this, they'll offer training, not just to the teller line, but they can offer it bank-wide, because that fraud can enter any of the doors. But with a teller, they're in a unique position where they get to know their customers, and they can recognize if a pattern is broken, if a customer comes in and makes a certain amount withdrawal every week and all of a sudden they're coming in and wiring a substantial amount of money, that's out of character for that customer. So what we do is we train tellers what those red flags are, what to watch for, behaviors, patterns in their withdrawals, unfamiliar characters coming into the building with them, family members that are too interested in their accounts. So we train them what those red flags are, and then train them on what their behaviors should be toward that individual, how to ask questions, how to separate the customer from someone that's come in with them if needed. We train them on what to do if they need help, if they're in a situation and they need to reach out to a supervisor, or If they get in a situation, the customer walks out the door and the supervisor doesn't know what to do, where can they escalate those situations
Right.
to get help?
I would imagine that most individuals who have made their mind up to take money out for a purpose they think is the right purpose, that it's really difficult to convince them otherwise. Could you share an incident with us when somebody refused to take the advice of the bank?
It happens more often than not. People get convinced that what they're doing is okay, and sometimes they don't want to trust a teller, or they're just so convinced that what they're doing is on the up and up. But we recently had a situation, and this has become more and more common, where individuals are trying to get out of a timeshare. And we had a customer that came in that started withdrawing substantial amounts of money and wiring it to an individual in Mexico. And the tellers, every time he came in, the tellers were saying, you know, this doesn't feel right. And
Yeah.
we've seen this happen. Maybe you need to take a look at that. Can we kind of walk through this with you? And he absolutely refused. So they reached out to our risk manager, who informed them that they needed to get the manager directly involved. And so this gentleman, after he had wired $40,000, was called into the manager's office. And the manager basically said, listen, we can't be a part of this anymore. So if you can't realize that this is a fraudulent act, it's a con that you've fallen for, that we need to close your account. And the gentleman got a little belligerent and said, well, let's call this individual. I'll prove to you that he's valid. And so they tried to reach him, couldn't reach him. And that's when the light bulb went off. And this was after he'd lost $40,000.
It's hard for people to accept the fact that they've been taken.
It is.
But I hope that we can implore people to let the bankers help them, that they are partners in this venture, and to prevent some of these unfortunate circumstances.
Exactly.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
The Utah Commission on Aging encourages all of you at any age to visit our site and be familiar with Adult Protective Services, Adult Legal Services, the Department of Justice, and other informative websites and tools. Remember that 73% of victims are over the age of 60. Verify before you trust. Be vigilant and accountable, and report the crime. Prevention is always better. Thank you for watching.